Hi and welcome to Ask Cam, and we are joined today by the lovely Sophie from HMRC, and we're going to be talking about national minimum wage, which we know is a really big factor for some of the people who will be following us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. So thank you and hello to everybody joining us. Sophie, first and foremost, can I get you to just sort of introduce yourself and what you do?
Yes, so my name is Sophie and I've worked in the national minimum wage team now since 2016, so quite a long time. And through that time, I've carried on, I've done quite a few different varied roles. I've actually been a compliance officer, so I've gone out to investigate whether at least the minimum wage is being paid by employers themselves. I've been a manager, I've worked on quite some high profile projects. And then what my portfolio is now is it centres around raising awareness of what the minimum wage is, why it's so important, and what risks you should be looking for as a worker to, into what you could be underpaid, so that's really, really important. It's not just about the rate of pay that you're on. There can be a lot of reasons as to why you could be underpaid, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, that's really what my role is. It's trying to get the messages out there, spread the word, and make sure that everybody is being paid in accordance with the law and understands their entitlement.
Fantastic. That's, like you say, really varied, very exciting. And just a reminder that, as usual, if you've tuned into our Ask Cam broadcast before, you will know that we do take questions live. Obviously, what we always do is offer a bit of a disclaimer that if it's very detailed about your personal circumstances, we might not be able to answer. We might just need to direct you to a bit of extra support, but we will do our best to answer. And if not, we'll absolutely let you know who will be able to answer your question. So kicking us off then, Sophie, what is the national minimum wage and sort of why does it exist, if you like?
Yeah, so the national minimum wage, or the national living wage, it's the legal minimum hourly amount that workers are eligible for. So it is the law that employers must pay this, and it's actually been in place in the UK, well, the national minimum wage has, since 1999. And there are 5 different rates, and depending on what age you are and whether or not you're apprentice, depends on what rate of pay you are entitled to. So if you are 23 and over, you're entitled to the national living wage, which is £9.50 per hour. 21 and 22-year-olds, the current rate is £9.18 per hour. 18 to 20-year-olds is £6.83 per hour. Under 18 is £4.81 per hour. And if you are an apprentice, it's £4.81 as well. The rates do change and increase every year, and it happens on the same date every year, which is effective of the 1st of April. And I always get asked this question whenever we do awareness sessions or any presentations. I always get asked what the difference is between the national living wage and the national minimum wage. So just in case we do get that question, I'll head that off now. The national living wage, I've already mentioned there, that is the rate of pay which is applicable to those that are 23 and over. And the national minimum wage is the applicable rate of pay for those that are under the age of 23. That is only the difference. So it just depends on how old you are. The national living wage has actually seen the biggest increase to date, which was effective of the 1st of April this year. And I think it stood at 6.6%. Wow. So yeah, the biggest increase that we've seen there. So yeah, that's what is the minimum wage, why it exists. And like I said, it's there, it's by law that employers must pay this. And we at HMRC are responsible for enforcing the minimum wage and ensuring that it's been paid by employers across the country.
Wonderful. So if people, like, just in case people have maybe missed that, like checking the rate, and they don't want to go back and necessarily watch again, which you can if you are tuning in late. But if they don't want to necessarily go back and listen to those rates and figure out what they should be on, how can people check what rate they should be on and check that they're getting the right amount, essentially?
The easiest way is literally just into Google, what are, NMW rates, and it'll be the top hit that comes up. And you'll get a little rates table there, and you'll be able to say, how old am I? What is the rate of pay that I'm entitled to? There is also a check your pay page, which has so much information for workers and employers, but probably more tailored for workers themselves, which goes through some of the risks that we would find or associate with minimum wage, which can mean that workers have been underpaid. Again, it'll give you all of the rates on there. And it'll also give you information on how to report an underpayment or potential underpayment to us as well. So there, you check your pay is probably the best place that you can do that. And it's just so important to check that you are being paid the correct rate now. Particularly, right now we're in, a situation with the rising cost of living, and it's just so important to check, especially now as well with the April uplift just happening, with the increase there. So make sure that your pay has been uplifted. Something I wanted to mention as well, Rosie, if that's okay, is based on our investigations that we actually carried out last year, we actually identified £16.3 million worth of arrears for 120,000 workers. Wow. And that was on the back of our investigations. I mentioned earlier about that we are responsible for enforcing that. So, we're the ones that are going out, taking part in these investigations and making sure that employers are paying in accordance with the law. So, yeah, they're the arrears and the workers that we identified for last year. And since 2015, in fact, we've actually recovered more than £100 million worth in unpaid wages for more than 1 million workers across the UK.
That's huge.
It is huge.
It really shows that, obviously there are a lot of people who maybe just, as you say, they might have missed an uplift when it came in, and therefore they thought they were getting the right amount of wages. Their employers maybe taken advantage of the fact that they didn't know and kept them on a lower wage than necessary, or for various factors. And it's really important to just sort of, as you say, we know we're seeing so many more people now coming to us who are struggling to make ends meet, really trying to find ways to get extra money into their budget. We always say the first thing that you need to make sure is getting everything you're entitled to, whether that's a benefit support or whether it's actually just checking you're getting paid the right amount for the work that you're doing.
That's it. And a lot of the work that we do, it's about educating. We want to make sure that people understand what they're entitled to by law and are not afraid to, speak out and say, do you know what, actually, no, this isn't right. This is what I should be entitled to. And what are my next steps? That's what we want to educate on in regards to that whole process and what a worker can do.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So I've popped up the link along the bottom of the screen there for Check Your Pay, and we'll make sure that gets added into the comments as well, so that you can actually just directly click through, just to make things even easier for you, because I don't think you can click through from my screen, unfortunately. So next question is sort of, what are some of the common issues you see with people say not being paid national minimum wage? When does that happen, and kind of are there any kind of grey areas, I guess?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's not as straightforward as it first might appear. I mean, a lot of people think, well, as long as I'm being paid at least the minimum wage or at least the national living wage, I'm fine. Well, actually, that might not be the case, and you could still be underpaid and you may not know it. And also, it's not just for that. Employers can get things wrong as well. And it's just having in the back of your mind, okay, what can mean that I'm underpaid? And it's, like I said, it's not just about the rate of pay. So I'll go through some of these examples now.
Yeah.
And if you want me to clarify anything or go for anything again, I'm more than happy to do so. But as I said, it's not just about, am I being paid the correct rate? These are other things that you need to be thinking about. So the first thing that we see, which is quite common, is employers failing to uplift pay. And we've talked there already about the April uplift, which happens effective of the 1st of April every year. And sometimes employers do fail to uplift a worker's pay at the right time and in accordance with that uplift. So that's why it's really important as a worker and an employer, that, you are making sure that you are being paid in accordance with that recent uplift. Also as well, missed birthdays. So birthdays is another key one. So say if you're turning 22 to 23, you go on to receiving the higher applicable age rate. So again, sometimes employers could miss this. So again, if you've got a significant birthday where your rate increases or is uplifted on the back of that, again, that's something else to look for as well that can be missed.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. Your next one, and again, I'd probably say this is our most common risk when we talk about national minimum wage underpayment, is unpaid working time. And there's a lot of scenarios or situations which can bring a worker into this category. So the main thing really is, what it says, unpaid working time, where a worker is working excessive hours or hours that they're just not being paid for. So it could be that they're doing quite a lot of overtime, they're just picking up quite a few extra shifts. And if this additional time isn't documented anywhere, or the employer doesn't keep sufficient or robust records, this time could be missed. So it could be as straightforward as that worker just is not being paid for all of the hours that they are working. And we always encourage workers, if they do feel that they're being underpaid, to keep a bit of a record or a diary of the hours, again, just to make sure that they are being paid for every hour that they're working, whether that's on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. However their pay works out, they need to make sure that, say if it's over the course of a month, they're being paid at least the minimum wage for every single hour they have worked in that month. So that's the first thing, really. The other thing with unpaid working time is sometimes we'll see that an employer asks a worker to come in earlier than their shift time or stay later than their shift time. And that could be for a number of different reasons. It could be to conduct a handover. It could be to put on PPE. It could be to undertake or perform cleaning duties, to stock take, to pass through security checks, anything. But if an employer is requiring a worker to be there for the purposes of work, then that is working time for minimum wage purposes. And again, that time must be paid for. The best way to think about this as well is, if you're a worker and you're coming in 15 minutes before every single shift, that time adds up over the course of a month. And if you're paid just on the minimum wage or slightly above, it's very likely that when you get to the end of the month, you're going to result in underpayment, because that time adds up. It could work out as 6-7 hours unpaid at the end of the month with those 15 minutes. You don't actually realise it until you see it in front of you that actually I am working a lot more here than I'm being paid for. Yeah. So that's another thing. Another one is training. So we see this quite a lot, and across various sectors actually, where an employer will ask a worker to carry out mandatory training as part of their job. It's a requirement of the job. And sometimes that training may not be paid for. So again, if that training is mandatory, it's a requirement of the job, that time must be paid for. Because sometimes an employer will say, you may not have time to do it in your shift time. Therefore, can you please undertake that training at home? The worker's like, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Well, that's fine as long as the worker's being paid for it. So that's really important as well. Your next one is deductions and payments in connection with your job. So when we talk about this, when I say deductions, we're talking about things like deductions from your pay, including, it could be things like uniform, tools or equipment, anything like that, where it's a deduction has been made from the worker's pay, again, in connection with the job in some way, can reduce a worker's pay or will reduce a worker's pay for minimum wage purposes. Things like tax, national insurance, student loan, anything like that is absolutely fine. That's your statutory deductions, no problems there. But it's any deduction that's been made that's in connection with the job. It's not to say that the employer can't make that deduction. It's just whether that deduction will bring a worker's pay below the minimum wage. So again, if you are just on the minimum wage or slightly above, and you have, say, a £30 deduction made from your first pay packet for a cost of a uniform, that could result in you being underpaid. So that's the best way to think about it, really. Yeah. It also works for payments for uniform, for example. So say the company or the business has a dress code policy, and as part of that dress code, the worker's required to wear black trousers, black T-shirt, black shoes. If in order to meet that dress code requirement, the worker has to go out and actually purchase these items from a third party or from a shop, wherever, again, that will reduce their pay for minimum wage purposes, because they've had no option but to purchase those items in order to work for this employer to meet that dress code. Yeah. So again, it's just something else to think about, really. Also, it doesn't matter if a worker actually agrees to a deduction. If that deduction still brings the worker's pay below the minimum wage, it still falls foul of the legislation. So it can still be an issue. So examples could be deductions for sports clubs tickets, like with a football club. It could be deductions for meals, lottery clubs, milk clubs, anything like that. Christmas clubs, we've seen it all. But again, if that deduction brings a worker's pay below the minimum wage, even if the worker agrees to it, it still falls foul of the legislation. Yeah, that's really interesting. So much stuff there. I have got another one around travel time. That's a real key one for us. So this is travel time in connection with employment. So you would usually see this with sort of delivery drivers, domiciliary carers. So again, with domiciliary carers is quite a good example here, because what we sometimes find is that employers will just pay for the contact time that the worker spent with the client or the service user, and not actually the travel time in between each client's home. How long it's taking them to travel there. Yeah. So again, if that worker is traveling in connection with their employment, again, they must be paid for that time. What I would say here is, from home to first place of work, wherever that is, it could be an office or it could be a client's home, that is classed as a commute. So it doesn't need to be paid for at the minimum wage. The same applies for at the end of the day as well. So from place of work to home, classed as a commute and doesn't need to be paid for at the minimum wage. But any time in between where a worker is traveling in connection with their job, it must be paid for.
Great.
Those are your main ones, really. Of course, there are others, but because of the time that we've got here, I just wanted to focus on the key risks that we do find as part of our investigations.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's been useful. I don't know if you've got any questions around any of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, if there are people watching here, if you're just tuning in, we are taking questions live. So if you did sort of have a question around, whether or not maybe you're missing out on national minimum wage, or if you think you're maybe falling foul of one of those risks, feel free to drop us a question in the comments box, and Sophie can perhaps answer or will do her best to answer your query. But I think you're absolutely right. I think certainly from anecdotally speaking to our advisors, those are the kinds of things that we tend to see when people come to us about sort of queries about pay. Certainly things like travel for care workers and deductions from pay is a really common one. There's one actually that sort of I was just looking at the Citizens Advice sort of our advice pages on national minimum wage just before we came on air. And there's something that sort of gets raised there around the idea of, if you say work in a restaurant and you're getting paid national minimum wage, and then or you're not getting paid national minimum wage, isn't more to the point, and then your employer says, oh, but I give you a meal at the end of your shift, and I give you benefits to being employed. How does that work? Does that count, or are they sort of getting away with something?
It doesn't. We need to make sure that worker has been paid cash, or however that form of payment has been made for the work that they have carried out. There are other benefits in kind that we can consider, but in terms of when it comes to hours and making sure that workers have been paid for every hour that they've worked, it's completely different. It can't be offset with anything else. That we need to see that payment has actually been made for those hours, and the worker is, in a sense, then in receipt of at least the minimum wage.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Nice and clear. So also, what about for people who maybe are watching this and going, do you know what? I'm in a new job now and I am getting paid national minimum wage, or even more. But I worked a job a few years ago where actually this feels like maybe I didn't get paid correctly. Is there anything they can do about that, or are they then sort of, is it just sort of something that they have to accept that they've maybe missed out?
Yeah, really good question. Workers, so in a nutshell, workers do not have to still be working for an employer to report this to us. What I would say is, as long as they've worked there within the last 3 to 6 years, we can still, have a look at that and potentially take that forward for investigation. We can actually, as part of our investigations, we don't actually differentiate between current and former workers. We look at every single worker that works there currently. And if a risk exists within a business and the records exist, we can go back as far as 6 years. Okay. So, if someone thinks, actually, I worked for an employer a couple of years ago, I don't think I was being paid what I should have been paid, absolutely, come and, report that. We can have a look at that for you. As long as they've worked there within the last 3 to 6 years, we can absolutely have a look at that to see if there's anything that we can do. And I don't think a lot of people realise that we can do that. So it is a great selling point or a benefit to reporting, really. Because I think a lot of people think, I've got to still be working there. Well, actually, no, you don't. You can still report an employer even if you no longer work for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's really helpful. And like I say, I think a lot of people would just accept, I think that's past now. I can't really do anything about it. So it's good to know that it can go back really that far. Yeah. I guess if someone if it is the job that you're currently in and you're concerned, I imagine a lot of people will feel a little bit nervous about contacting HMRC about their employer. Is it possible to do that anonymously? Can people, make sure they're not found out, essentially?
They can, and there's a few different options, really. What we would do is we would always really encourage a worker to submit a complaint or report an employer, on their own behalf in the first instance, whether they do that through our online form or via ACAS, which I'll talk about shortly. We would always encourage a worker to do that themselves in the first instance. At that point, when we actually speak to them, and it's one of our compliance officers that speaks to them, they can say, do you know what? I don't want the employer finding out that it was me that made the complaint. I want to remain anonymous throughout the course of the investigation. And that is absolutely fine. In fact, the majority of the cases that we have, or reports from workers, they say that, I want to remain anonymous to my employer, and that's fine. In the majority of cases, that's absolutely fine for us to do. And we can keep them, they will remain anonymous. The only time we will have a conversation with a worker around that is, maybe they've spoken to their employer before, or it's a very small workforce. The employer could put two and two together that it was them that made the complaint. So we will always have that conversation with the worker from the outset before we take that forward, because it's very important to us that the worker feels comfortable, and we wouldn't want to put them, under pressure or anything like that. If we did want to take that forward, so that for us is really, really important. It is the heart of what we do. I think to say what it is, you can remain anonymous. And again, I think a lot of workers are maybe, as you said there, maybe a bit fearful about doing that. They may not want to rock the boat. They don't want their employer to find out that it was them that reported them. And we understand some of this. We understand some of these barriers. And what we're trying to do is trying to break those barriers down, because the way that we see it is, you are entitled to this by law, and it's your right to report your employer if you're being underpaid. And actually, we receive thousands of complaints from workers each year. So the word is getting out there, and it's becoming a lot more common where workers are coming forward, especially as we've talked about, where we are at the moment in the current climate.
Yeah.
I can talk about the different routes as well. If a worker wants to make a complaint.
Sorry, I was going to just jump in as well and sort of talk from a sort of an advice perspective, I guess, that just to say as well that if someone feels confident and comfortable to, we would also say, you can just speak to your employer if you think you're being obviously, this may depend on your relationship with your employer and how you feel that might be received, but it's just sort of I think what we're always kind of conscious of, I guess, is that people might go almost straight to HMRC, and actually it could have just been resolved really and it, as you say, it might have been one of those things like an oversight and someone's missed a birthday or not realised. So it is possible. I've also seen that we've just had a question come in from LinkedIn. So thank you, Matt. So he's asked, is there a cutoff between travel time between client visits and standby time between appointments? So i.e. time spent waiting for a next visit or a next pickup. And sort of saying he can see how maybe domiciliary care workers might fall in a bit of a gap there. Is that something that we can address?
Yeah, so it can be quite complex when we talk about waiting time. It's definitely a consideration that we would look at as part of our calculations. What I would say is I would actually go to the Calculating National Minimum Wage Guide. And if you go on a specific, I'm trying to think it'd just be under travel time, wouldn't it? If you go under the travel time section of that, there'll be a section within that on waiting time, which will give you a bit more of an indication or a bit of a flavour as to how we would calculate or look at that and what we would consider. But with waiting time, it is on a case-by-case basis. There's quite a lot, as I said, that we have to consider. But no, it's a really good question, and absolutely it's a consideration. But yeah, it's on a case-by-case basis. But I would go to the Calculating Minimum Wage Guide for a bit more information about that.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sophie. And again, we'll make sure that all of these links are sort of followed up in our comment sections, and so that people can go and click through when they hear you referencing things like that. We'll make sure that people can get to those. But yeah, and obviously, as you say, if someone is in that position, they still sort of feel a bit confused. They've checked the guide, I guess it's always worth a call to you, possibly.
Absolutely. And I'll go through those routes in a moment. But sometimes, it can be quite good just to have a conversation with someone and say, this is my situation. Is there a potential issue here? And, that's a lot of the work that ACAS can provide and do for them. So I can talk about that route in a second as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sophie. So, I guess that kind of, it does bring us around to if someone feels like they're maybe not being paid correctly. We've talked about potentially, approaching your employer and just having a chat to make sure they've not missed something. But if they then sort of think actually, or if they don't feel confident and comfortable to do that, and they want to take further action, what should they do? What's their next steps?
And I think you're really right in saying that sometimes it might be easy to, if they're able to have that conversation with the employer, they should try to do that and resolve it internally in the first instance before getting HMRC involved. And also, we will always have that conversation with the worker when they put in a report or a complaint to make sure that any discussion that they have had with an employer has ended before we get involved. Again, it's to try and give the employer the opportunity to put things right first. So it's a really good point that you made there as well. But if that's not an option, or a worker has already spoken to the employer in the first instance and is just not really getting anywhere with that, or is not able to resolve the issue, there are two options. So the first option in reporting an employer and coming through to HMRC is the Pay and Work Rights online form, which lives on gov.uk. This is the most common route where we receive worker complaints, and it takes less than 5 minutes to complete. It's our most common route, and it only asks for very basic information. So in the majority of cases, a member of our minimum wage team would probably contact you again to take your complaint forward. But that's our most common route. As I said, it takes less than 5 minutes to complete. It just asks for, obviously, your details, the employer name, it asks for a bit of the nature of the query. That'll come straight through to our national minimum wage team. And as I said there, it's more than likely that we will contact you again just to get a bit more information to try and get that through for.
Great. I think I might have just lost you. I'm not sure if that's my connection or yours. I'm hoping that you're going to be back soon. So obviously Sophie's just, I don't know, as I say, I'm hoping that people who are watching the broadcast can see and hear me at least. But if you can't, please comment, let us know. And hopefully Sophie will be back shortly. And also, again, if you have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box or the comment box, and we'll hopefully be able to pick those up when Sophie comes back in. And thank you again to Matt for your question there. That was really helpful. She's back. I can see you moving. That's great.
Oh, had I gone?
You had, yeah. I think. I'm not sure. I think our connection just slightly dropped out. So I think hopefully people could still see and hear me. Well, I was chattering away, so I'm hoping that people could still see and hear me. But yes, and also I've heard from our person behind the scenes has also said that I was coming through. It was just Sophie for us. So
where did I get up to?
So basically, you had done the check your pay, not the check your pay, sorry, the Pay and Work Rights online form. So we've covered the Pay and Work online rights online form. Sorry, me falling over my words. What happens after that? What's the other option?
So the other option is ACAS. So we have a fantastic working relationship with ACAS, where ACAS are able to identify the key triggers that we just talked about earlier when it comes to NMW underpayment. So you put the number up there, brilliant. ACAS can advise, sometimes as well, a worker may just want to talk a situation through first before they actually submit a complaint. So again, this is the best route for that. And also ACAS can transfer someone directly through to us. So they'll conduct a warm transfer and that'll come directly over to us as well, where again we can have a conversation with them. And the amount of times I've overheard our team have conversations with workers, the workers have said, this is my situation. And the amount of times I've heard the team say, actually, based on the information that you've given me today, there might not be an issue right now. These workers are like, do you know what? I feel so much better knowing that there isn't an issue right at this time. So, we're not just, we're there to educate as well. There doesn't always have to be a definite issue. We're there to educate and upskill as well. That's really, really important to us. ACAS is also the best option if English isn't first language. They offer a translation service, as do we. So that would be the best way for that as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say, we do heavily rely on workers coming forward, reporting employers. And hopefully I've got across there that you can remain anonymous. And it's very important that we do dispel that message. And, if you are on the fence or you're unsure about reporting, that is an option for you. So yeah, and as I said, we receive thousands of complaints from workers each year. So there are 2 options.
Wonderful. That's really helpful. Thank you, Sophie. I feel like we've covered quite a lot in that half hour. So thank you so much for your time. Is there anything before we wrap up that you wanted to make sure people know before we say our goodbyes?
I think the main thing is, that HMRC, we are here to help. We're here to support. We're here to educate. We're here to educate workers on their rights, what they're entitled to by law. And, for me, like I said earlier, part of my job, it's about spreading the word, it's spreading that awareness. And, I'm trying to get others to do that. If they come across a situation where a friend, a colleague, a family member is in a situation or a job, and they can pick up on these key triggers and think, actually, you could be being underpaid there. And this is what you can do to actually resolve that. And you can report that to HMRC. And hopefully, I've gone through some of the benefits there. We look at former and current workers. We can go back as far as 6 years. There's a lot of benefits into actually reporting that and getting us to investigate that on the worker's behalf. So hopefully I've been able to get that across today.
I think you absolutely have. Thank you so much for your time, Sophie. It's been really, really appreciated. Hopefully everyone else has found that useful. And if you are only just catching us at the end, don't worry, this will be saved to all of our social pages. So please do catch up. I think there's some really valuable information. And thank you again and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.